Hello again, Gary Stearman with another comment on Israel. And what haven't we said about Israel over the years? We've referred to Israel in, for example, Zechariah 12, where the leaders, the military leaders of Israel, are referred to as a hearth of fire. Zechariah 12:5, the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength, and the Lord of hosts their God. In that day will I make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood. In other words, when the enemy attacks, they will be successful. In another place, Isaiah 17, woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas and to the rushing of nations, and make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. This is the enemy that comes against Israel from the north, and Israel defeats that enemy. In fact, they're defeated in 24 hours, according to Isaiah 17. Isaiah 17, as you know, begins with the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Well, there are many, many passages of Scripture in the Old Testament, Ezekiel 38 and 39, that refer to Israel as being not only victorious, but in an amazing way victorious against the invading forces that come against her in the last days. Which brings me to an article written by our friend Avi Lipkin, who lives in Jerusalem, in Israel, and he is, of course, a great friend of Prophecy Watchers. We've talked to him many times. He's written a short article, and the title of this article, Syria, Slowly Sinking Titanic. Wow. This in light of Isaiah 17, the burden of Damascus, which describes Damascus as being obliterated as a city. In this article, and I don't have time to read the whole thing, we'll make it available to you elsewhere, and we'll let you know where that is. Avi says scant attention was paid to drawing logical borders back in the days when the borders of Israel and the borders of Syria and Iraq were drawn. In 1919, after World War I, the famous or infamous Sykes-Picot Treaty, in which the British, the Russians, and the French just basically drafted a bunch of arbitrary boundaries. Well, Avi, in his article, talks about how those boundaries were created, but listen to this sentence. Scant attention was paid to drawing logical borders, and instead a ruler was used on a map of the Middle East to create countries such as Syria and Iraq, which no longer exist today, as they did before the onset of the so-called Arab Spring of 2011. Did you hear that? Avi says that the borders of Syria and Iraq no longer exist as they once did. They are contested borders. Both the French and British colonial powers used the principle of divide and conquer, proffering power to the minority Alawites in Syria as well as Arab Sunnis in Iraq. The Alawites represented a mere 10% of the population of Syria, while the Arab Sunnis in Iraq represented a mere 20% of the entire population of Iraq. And so it goes. The thrust of this article is that since the boundaries drawn up back in 1919 were essentially artificial boundaries, from that day until this, there has been a rumbling dissatisfaction among all of the tribes, each one desiring to get a better positioning, a better share of the pie. We've seen a number of power groups rise and fall since Israel became a state. Reading now a little bit further along in Avi's article, and this is very interesting. He says, simply put, the soldiers of Bashar al-Assad, that's the leader of Syria, the soldiers of Bashar al-Assad are being decimated and cannot be replaced. Hezbollah of Lebanon, which has been helping Bashar al-Assad, is also bleeding profusely. And so are the Iranian and Iraqi Shiite volunteers coming to Syria to help Bashar. And he says, a good parallel is the defeat of the Nazis in Europe and the Japanese in World War II. Simply put, the U.S. outproduced the Axis powers while the Red Army had 10 times as many soldiers as the Wehrmacht. It was only a question of time. And then he says the old maps of Syria and Iraq no longer exist. Conclusion for Israel: Israel owes the British and French nothing regarding the artificial borders of the Sykes-Picot Treaty of 1919. The borders of the 1947 UN partition plan no longer exist. The June 5th, 1967 borders of Israel no longer exist and are not sacrosanct. In light of the present Middle East realities, there is no justification for any further Israeli withdrawals. And so the situation is set. We have basically an untenable confrontation of nations circulating in major and minor power groups, each one arming itself to the teeth, and each one declaring that it wants to be the first to reduce Israel to ashes. It's an absolute formula for the wars that we see written about in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Isaiah 17, Zechariah 12, and many, many other places. It's just amazing how often you see this situation referred to. Again, we have in Isaiah 11:11, in that day thou shalt make thy plant to grow, and in the morning thou shalt make thy seed to flourish. This is a reference, I think, to latter-day Israel, all of the agricultural success, all of the blessing of the Lord. But the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and desperate sorrow. And this is referring to that invasion. The harvest shall be a failure in that day for Israel. Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them. And here, I believe, is what we're hearing today, the rushing of nations like the rushing of many waters, circulating, if you will, around Israel. We have Vladimir Putin, we have Hassan Rouhani, we have Ayatollah Khamenei, we have Hezbollah, we have the princes of the Saudis. We have all of these power groups rushing back and forth, attempting to position themselves to flood Israel out. And of course, but God shall rebuke them. This is Isaiah 17:13. And they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. Behold, at eventide trouble, before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. There's going to be a war in the very near future. Fortunately, blessedly, the Lord's going to make certain that Israel wins the war. But it's not going to be without casualties, and it's not going to be without hardship. So pray for the peace of Jerusalem. By the way, if you're interested in reading about Israel in prophecy, I have a brand new book from Tim LaHaye and Ed Hindson here. It's called Target Israel, Caught in the Crosshairs of the End Times. And here at Prophecy Watchers, we just got this, would you believe, got this in today. But if you check prophecywatchers.com, the online bookstore, we'll show you how you can get your very own copy of Target Israel. A lot of information in this that has to do with the subject matter that I have been talking about. Gary Stearman, hey, have a great day in the Lord, and keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.